So today we're here with Jack Rhysider, who's, of course, as everybody knows, who's listening to Malicious Life, is the host and creator of the Darknet Diaries. Darknet Diaries is an um, amazing podcast about cybersecurity that we love listening to and being a part of. Jack, we've crossed paths once or twice. Um, so this is the third time, I think. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it's good seeing with you again.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I'm sure a lot of the people who are listening know about Darknet Diaries, but if you want to just in a few words tell us what Darknet Diaries is,
Well, it's a lot
we
like
can
Malicious
start from
Life.
there.
Yeah, it's a lot like Malicious Life. It's a podcast and it goes into stories about cybercrime and stuff like that. Typically one episode is one story. Um, but yeah, I like to try to interview the people who are closest to the story, the people who are affected, the victims, or the people who pulled the trigger, the criminals that were involved, and that's what I'm doing. I'm doing a podcast on that.
I mean, that's insane. And then today it's kind of a empire, I would say. It's crazy successful. But I wanted to hear, we're here to talk about the formation of Darknet, you know? So can you tell me maybe the story that preceded Darknet? Because I remember when we talked, we were chatting at DEF CON about 3 years ago. And I remember it was almost an all in for you, right? It was like all or nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of like, as a shark, you smell a little drop of blood and you're like, I'm going for it. But it was, yeah, it's hard to know exactly if there was one thing. It was kind of like a whole bunch of different indicators. Like, number one, I loved podcasts and I had grown up listening to This American Life and Radio Lab and just was so glued to shows like that. But then when I was getting more into podcasts, I was like, well, where's the one on security and hacking that is storytelling in that kind of form? And I would see stories that would show up like 4 or 5 years later that had a whole bunch of more things that happened, but nobody was covering it on the news because they were just little minor things. And so I was like, well, who's going back and recapping all this stuff? I want to hear the whole picture, the whole story from the beginning all the way to the end. We know so much more now because when security news story hits, we guess at a lot of the details. Oh, it must have been Russia or China or this and that, and we don't know very much. And then we learn later it was totally not what we thought, and all that stuff we thought was totally wrong. There's all this extra information. So I like this kind of slow news kind of thing. Just wait until all the information is there, and then tell me the whole story. I want to hear the whole story, not just the bleeding edge news. And that's the kind of stuff I wanted to hear. So there was this like void in my life. I wanted it. And I think Malicious Life was just starting up at the same time. So I wasn't
Yeah.
quite, it was like only a few episodes in. So I was like, I don't know if this is close. Like Malicious Life was close. And maybe it wasn't there. Maybe we both started at the same time, but
Yeah.
it was one of those that I couldn't find it for the longest time. Right. So there's that. And then there were people like Leslie Carhart and Johnny Xmas gave a talk once that said, they're these are two big names in infosec. They give talks, probably like 3 or 4 talks a year, and one of them was like, hey, don't, if you want to impress a bunch of people, don't come up to this, an infosec conference and talk in front of a bunch of infosec people. It's really hard to impress those people because they're very tuned into everything. Go to something like Comic-Con and tell them you're a hacker and here are the things you've hacked, and you'll be amazed at how much you can pack the room and amaze people who aren't in this circle. So go outside the infosec circle and give talks there. And that kind of triggered something in me as well of like, maybe I can expand this. Maybe I don't have to, like, it doesn't need to be just for infosec people. It can be for the wider audience. But at the same time, I wanted it to be for me. I wanted it to fill that gap in my head. So, and I've
Yeah.
been in infosec for 10 years at that point, doing network security engineering, managing firewalls, intrusion detection systems, this kind of thing. And so
Yeah.
I was like, I don't want it to be too dumb for me. I want it to be entertaining for me too. So I wanted that good balance of, there's enough technical stuff in there to satisfy someone like me, but then there's enough simple, it's explained simple enough to hit the wider audience. And like I
Yeah.
said, I want those people who are closest to it to be in it as well. I don't want the experts. I want the boots on the ground kind of people. And yeah, all that just kind of came together, and I said, maybe I need to make this thing.
It was a field, especially back then. It was a field that needed to be demystified, right? Like, remember the Target hack and all these things that were happening around that time. People were reporting on it, but they didn't really know.
Yeah. And not just that, there's a lot of misconceptions about hackers, right? It's like,
Yeah,
oh, there's this
yeah,
magic involved with it. Well, if they find the password written down, or if the password was admin, where's the magic to that? There's no
right.
magic. It's just a really big basic flaw that some system admin did. They didn't secure their stuff enough, and somebody just came and typed admin as the username and password, and that's how the hacker got in. So that's not even hacking, if you ask me, right? That's barely anything. And so it's that kind of demystifying. And there's times where you think, oh, it's happening in a dark room, and all this stuff, but I do some stories where it happened in fifth period class in a high school on a
Hmm.
tablet, on an app, an Android tablet, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
so it's like, well, think about that as the hacking setting. Fifth period class on an Android tablet in the back of class, and they hacked the school's website, right? Like, I like demystifying some of that stuff and showing us that there's a lot of different people involved in this, a lot of different settings, a lot of different methods to do things and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's still a lot of mystique to it, I would say. I mean, if you look at the sort of what people call the dark web, or sort of behind the scenes, but it's also becoming so commercialized, like ransomware as a service, things like that. People are building companies, kind of like mirroring startup companies on the defense side, just building services and providing customer support, and it's insane.
Yeah, it's
But
really
I mean, it was obviously it was a great success. I mean, it really hit with a lot of people. I mean, remember when we were talking, it was almost like we were kind of neck to neck in downloads. But
hmm
then, and that was three years ago. But then I remember next time we met was it's like two years ago or so, and you were already way, like, it was a runaway success. It was
yeah.
like for us, it's a slow growth. For you, it was like a huge spike, and it's still growing, right? And did it feel like an explosion like that? And is
No,
it?
but we'll
Yeah.
talk about that all in kind of feeling, right? So as I launched it, people right away were listening to it that I didn't know, and that's kind of a big deal for a podcaster. You first show it to your friends and family,
Mhm.
and that's probably where it stays for like the first 6 months or something. It doesn't
that
really
that
expand
first
beyond
that first iTunes review from
that. Yeah.
somebody you don't know.
Yeah, yeah. Well, actually, I was at a conference and someone came up to me and said, I only had like 6 episodes out by then, and they came to me and said, I've listened to all 6 episodes and I cannot wait for the next one. And I'm like, who are you? I don't even know. And they're like, oh, I don't know you either, but and so that was like that taste of blood in the water, right? As a shark.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, wow, there's people who really like this and they're really itching for the next episode. And at the same time, there was maybe a year after that, right? Somebody came up to me at a conference and just handed me money and said, I just appreciate you so much. I want to show thanks." And I'm
Wow.
just like, this is crazy that people are just so into it. And of course, I'm getting fan mail and all this kind of stuff. But and the fan mail is crazy. Like, people are saying that they sat their whole family down to listen to this one episode, and I'm like,
Mhm.
who does that? That's crazy.
Mhm.
So I knew something was special about it then, just because of these kind of little things that would show up every now and then. If it mattered so much to some of these fans, then I knew if I keep it going and if I scale it up, then it's going to work. I just knew it, right? It was clear at the time. So that's why I was able to just say, okay, I'm going to put everything I have into this. And this is something that I've been wanting since 1999, right? The .com boom. I was like, how did this pass me up? I could have wrote anything, a dictionary online, and I would have been very successful by now, and yet I didn't do anything. And then the Bitcoin boom came, and I didn't do anything, right? So I was like, okay, I'm
Yeah.
not going to miss like my last opportunity. The podcast was booming at the time, right? So I was like, okay, I'm getting in on this, and that was great because I rode the wave. But yeah,
Mhm.
that's I quit my job and I went full time into podcasting, even though it wasn't making any money, like zero money.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm going to give it 3 months of just full 100%. And if I can start making money at the end of that, I'm going to keep it going. And sure enough, I got my first sponsor at the end of like 3 months.
Oh man, I mean that was the crazy thing about it. You just quit your job, you just put everything on a line, and I feel like that's you have to succeed in this sort of situation. How did it all affect you from quitting your job, going all in, FOMO, like you don't want to miss out on this wave? Actually, I feel like you really paved a way. Like it wasn't like it was easy for any of us. I don't know if people know, but back when we started, there were podcasts like Reply All, these huge,
Hmm.
uh, um, humongous podcasts that were like almost seemed insurmountable. But how did it feel to go from that, going from quitting your job, doing that, but then now you've surpassed a lot of these other monoliths, or what should we call them? These mega
Yeah.
podcasts.
My competition, right? Because here's the
Yeah,
thing, when I was like 4 or 5 episodes in, that's when I looked around and I saw all these shows that are exactly like what I had in my head. Reply All, your show, all these places. There's another one called Hacked, Root, what was that
yeah,
other one? Something Root by Cisco. Um, and I was like, "Oh, actually this has been done. There's nothing new about this." And so I kind of give up. I was like, I even listened to Reply All, and I was like, "There's these episodes are the same exact topics I have listed in my Trello board of like
yeah.
potential episodes." Oh my gosh, this is horrible. And they interviewed the people I actually wanted to interview and everything. Like, there's no way I'm gonna get that story to be any better than what they did. And yeah, what Malicious Life was doing was great too. And I was like, oh, forget it. I think I'm done. But and so I really did. I was like, I'm not gonna be able to outdo these people. You've got a corporation behind you at Malicious Life. Reply All's been
Right.
there for years. Just not gonna happen. And I listened. I was like, okay, well, I started this because I wanted this to be, I wanted to be satisfied with with a show like this. So, the more I listened to Reply All and Malicious Life, I was like, this isn't the way I would do it. It's the same story, the same topic, the same exact format with the music and everything involved, but it's not the way it's not from my perspective. It's not how I see the world. I have a different upbringing than the people who made these other shows. And so that to me was just a different enough differentiator to say, I think it's still worth me doing this, even if it overlaps on some of this other stuff, because it didn't cover some of the topics I wanted them to get into or ask the questions I wanted them to ask. We didn't push the border the way I wanted it to be pushed. So there was just not that satisfaction enough. Still, even if it was close, it wasn't enough. I think if I had heard about that first, I probably wouldn't have made the show. But
Hmm.
because I was already like 4 or 5 episodes in, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it anyway. And so yeah, that was kind of a big, a big
That's
disappointment. But then it kind of got me going again.
that's a mind fuck. I feel like that's like a little bit of a. I mean, I feel like it's a bit of a lonely experience as well. I remember when we first started. It was like you and us. I think we were kind of first, and then there was like Hacked and Breached and like any
Cryptid.
a thousand synonyms for hacking, and everybody was doing like a hacking podcast, and we were also feeling the same way. It was like everybody's doing it, and they're all promoting it. Like McAfee had a giant a base of like existing
Mhm.
customers, and and they were like going up, and we were all the way in the bottom.
Yeah, I
But
mean, another thing is I was indie, right? I was independent, and so
yes,
you
exactly.
had Cyber Reason behind you. McAfee had their thing, and I was like, well, I don't have to listen to anybody. I can just do whatever I want.
Yeah,
There was something special about that too.
I mean, that's not yeah, that's the I think that's the amazing thing about it. I feel like that made a whole lot of difference, where you really put a lot of love into crafting these stories. I mean, that led to so much. I mean, you have, like, you and I were talking about there's a story, the NSA reached out to you, right? Like
Hmm.
the NSA, that's like
Yeah,
insane.
yeah. That's yeah. When I was at DEF CON one year, and I got a tap on the shoulder, and was like, "Hey, I'm part of the NSA and stuff." And I was like, "Oh shoot, what did I say? What did I do? Are you here to arrest me? What's going on?" He's like, "No, I want to share a story with you." And the fact that the NSA listened to my show and had a story that they wanted to share with me was just really remarkable. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, tell me about that. I mean, how does that make you feel when, like, is that not insane to imagine that somebody in a NSA dark room is, like, sitting in front of a monitor, and you're in their ears,
Hmm.
like, whispering.
Yeah. How are you today? Uh, yeah, I mean, it is crazy because it stretches into all different areas, right? I mean, I'm in the ears of the Apple engineers and the Google engineers, and pick like a building in downtown New York City. I'm being played in those buildings too, right? Like, yeah, I've gotten emails from people who are, I work on the 67th floor of this building, and we listen to your show. Like the whole office is into your show, and I'm like, wow, it's crazy. So yeah, it's just wild to and I don't know if I'm influencing them or educating them or what I'm really doing, but I do feel like I have some sort of power that, I've got their attention at least, right? Then I think that's kind of what this game is about, is getting people's attention and keeping it for as long as you can. If you can do that, you're winning the game. And I think once you can have attention, you can monetize that attention and stuff like that. You can do whatever you want. But yeah, I
Yeah,
mean, the fact that it trickles into all these different spaces is a mind trip to me. I try not to think of it when I make the show. I for the I typically have like one person in mind that I'm talking to, and I just imagine I'm talking to them casually at a bar, and I'm just telling them the story, and that's kind of how I get through it. But
yeah,
I do get nervous sometimes when I'm about to hit publish, and I like the next day after I wake up after publishing, I'm just like, oh my gosh, did I stir the wrong bee's nest, or did I say the wrong thing, or did I forget something? Do I sound like a total moron because I didn't research one little thing enough, and now it's all coming back to me. So I do get nervous can that I can talk with these people, or I could talk to these people, and they don't abandon me and think that I'm just a fool or moron or something, right? They actually
yeah,
respect it, and they want to come back for more, and that is just such an amazing experience, I guess.
yeah. Is that something that still happens to you, or is that like a relic of the past? Something
No,
that
it
was
still
near to you?
happens. Some of these recent episodes, I get pointed, right? I talk about Kick and how much I hate Kick, the app, and
Mhm.
all these things. And there's some other episodes like that where I'm just like, this is wrong on all these levels, and you express all your opinions and some emotional stuff.
Yeah,
And when I do that, I'm bound to offend someone or something, right? Like
yeah.
it's just part of it, and I get nervous about that, right? Who did I offend, or what did I not do respectfully enough, or all these things, and like uh, I'm specifically offending a company in that situation, right? This is how horrible that company is and stuff. And I'm not that kind of person to want to really put my finger right in someone's chest and say, you're messing up, you're screwing up here, and I hate you. But that's sometimes I think it calls for that. So that's the parts where I get nervous. Um, is anytime we talk about politics too, and it's weird how much politics comes up
Mm.
in cybersecurity, where it's like we just want to secure the router, man. Why are we talking about politics here? But it comes up so much.
So why do you tell those stories? I mean, I I
I-
I I know that you don't wanna, like, I can tell that you don't wanna offend anybody, but, like, why do you tell those stories anyway?
which stories? The political ones and stuff.
Political ones, but not just, like, if
The
you're,
pointed ones.
like, companies, like, if you're
Mhm.
pointing at a company and saying something, truth to power or whatever it is,
Yeah,
what's important to you about that?
yeah. I think it's important to express what's right and wrong sometimes. Yeah, it's a good question, right? Like if I want to try to maintain the middle ground and just be as neutral as possible and just call attention to what's happened and really not take a side, then why do I take a side sometimes? And I think it's rare for me to really take a side. But it's one of those things where it's just like there's overwhelming evidence here that this is the side that everyone should be on. And
Yeah.
and in those situations, I really don't get much pushback. Like one time I was really getting mad at fentanyl, the drug, which is a prescription drug that manufacturers make. But I'm just like, there is no business. This shouldn't even be in the world. And it's kind of in, in context, you've got to understand, what's happened there. But yeah,
I mean,
there's
it's
like a few people were like, yeah, I think you're right, even though my dad is taking it or something, and prescription wise, and it just
it's
doesn't, yeah, it's just, I don't know, it's just one of those things that I think there's just so much there's so many indicators that I think it's safe to stay on this side very strongly, and do that. It's hard to say. And one of those things is like, what fights do I want to fight out there as well? Because if you turn on social media, there's 5,000 things that hit you in the face. Oh, you need to stand up for these rights, and you need to be this kind of person, and we need to all fight this and this and that. And if you fight all these battles, you're not going to be effective in any of them. So
Mhm.
you just get worn out trying to be on everybody's side and all this stuff, and just constantly trying to keep the fight up. So I want to pick my battles more carefully, I guess, too. So every now and then I just have something to say and go for it.
I mean, it's such a personal thing, though. Even the way you describe it, you're sitting in a bar talking to somebody. I mean, who do you sit in a bar talking to? You talk to friends, you talk to family, and
Hmm.
such a personal thing that you're replicating to hundreds of thousands of strangers every time you press that publish button. And yeah, I mean, I wonder how that makes you feel, especially since, I mean, the irony here is, so if for all of you who are listening on the podcast, you can't see Jack right now, but if you go on our YouTube channel, which you should, you can see the extended interview. And Jack is has a filter over his webcam. He looks like a beautiful painting right now, um, beautiful expressionist painting. I'd love to purchase someday, but um, and you do have something, you do guard your privacy in some ways, right? That's something that's important to you.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, for many reasons. I'm a privacy advocate to begin with. I'm putting my finger in the chest of some companies that they might not like, so I want to make sure that it's harder for them to find me if they need to like find me.
Yeah,
There's people would probably love to have that feather in their hat that I hacked Jack Rhysider or something like that, right? So just make it harder, right? And I know it's not going to be
yeah,
impossible. um, especially if you go up a nation state actor or $1 billion company, they're going to figure out something. It just takes one phishing email, honestly. But yeah, it's and then in the media, there's a lot of attacks against journalists, and I feel like I'm on the spectrum of a journalist since I'm trying to tell these stories as truthful as I can. So yeah, I just want to. And the internet's a dangerous place. I've been somewhat stalked before, and I was just like, "Whoa, this is crazy." So backing off out of that.
yeah. I mean, it makes me think of something that Ron Levy, the host of the podcast, like our listeners know who the Ron is. Um, Something Ron said in one of the early episodes was, he was researching a story about worms and Trojans and things like that, and he started getting paranoid about his own life. Like every like CPU hike that was out of place was like, oh god, it's a crypto miner.
Yeah.
Every single packet going in the wrong direction is like, oh god, somebody's monitoring. And he got paranoid for a while. I feel like that's something that could happen to you. Is it the stories that, do you feel that sometimes you're
Yeah, I
exposed
mean,
to it?
when you get a new kind of vision, sometimes where what can possibly happen, there's like this flashback in your head of like, oh my gosh, I made so many mistakes. I'm sure I've been hit by that because I didn't know that was an attack vector or something like that. Or I made these mistakes, and I'm sure somebody picked up on it somewhere. And you can have these kind of flashbacks, and it gets really scary sometimes. And it's really hard to like stay on this path of keeping yourself secure. And I think that's probably where all security people should start, is keeping your own self secure. And
Hmm.
I get surprised when I see people, presenting so much of their own private life online, and they're, security advocates. I'm like, start with yourself. Like I could probably guess your 10 of your, secret questions. What's your dog's name? What's your favorite color? Like all these things. Like you're telling us all this stuff on social media. It's easy.
That's super easy. I mean, and a lot of it could be social engineered it's just to happen so quickly. You can get a
Hmm.
phone call, "Hey, it's your bank. We need you to authorize whatever." And in isolation, it sounds completely legitimate. But in a moment, you're like having dinner with your girlfriend or wife, and you're like taking a phone call. You're not really paying attention. It can happen so quickly. But I mean, yeah, I mean, the podcast. I mean, I feel like that could be one of the reasons that people are drawn to these topics because it does affect, like, the stories that I remember the most are the stories that are most personal to me, like the things that affect me the most, right? Don't you think that that's something that maybe draws people in?
Yeah, it's interesting when people tell me their favorite episodes because every now and then it's one that's really I don't know, old and obscure, and I barely remember making it. But they're like, "Oh my gosh, it meant so much to me. It meant so much to me because I work in that industry or I live in that city that the person was arrested in or something." And I'm like, "Oh yeah, I guess that would matter to you more." But yeah, you're right. The ones that kind of hit us close to home are the ones that are probably people's favorites.
Yeah. What do I mean, we kind of talked a little bit about the impact of this podcast. You've been covering these stories for a very long time from a bunch of different sides. I mean, what do you think is at the core of these? Do you think there's any commonality to these stories that you're telling? Not just from the point of view selecting, but just overarching?
Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, as far as like me picking stories, I'm looking for stories with twists in them, right? You think it's going one way, but then it totally takes a turn and goes another. And so that's as far from a storyteller's perspective, this is what I have to like find in order to find a good story. If there's no twists and it just goes the way we want, then it's not really that exciting. Like you want to do a penetration test and you go in and you go it and you do it and you find a vulnerability and you give the report. Like there's really not a lot to that, right? But if you're
Yeah.
going to do a penetration test and everything goes wrong, well, now I'm interested, right? What went wrong? Well, we hit the wrong customer and we totally we penetrated into a network we have no authorization to get into. Oh my gosh. Okay, tell me about that story. Like what happened? So I mean that's kind of the common theme there. And if you take that, now you're looking at every one of the stories is where something went terribly wrong. It did not go as planned. It was probably the worst day of someone's life. Um, and yeah, I'm picking those particular ones and I'm highlighting those. So it's I don't pick so many where there's like a win of like the defenders were winning and like kept everyone out and stuff like that because those kind of are uneventful, right?
Right.
It was like, yeah, our security mechanisms held up and we didn't get hacked. Okay, well, there's no story there, but good job. So, yeah, I don't know. It's if you're looking at just the lens of all the things that could go wrong, then yeah, I think there is situations where I don't know if there's a common theme. There's either management didn't take it seriously enough, or people were insiders that took care of things, like an employee did something, or
Yeah. Do you find that you hear more from like defeated defenders, or like do people tell you about things like their worst day? Is it kind of like that? Or is it more from people who are like, let me tell you about the craziest shit that I've done?
yeah, I think people are more interested in tell me about the illicit behavior that they did when they were younger
Yeah.
versus the defense team that day they got breached and how they recovered from things. For some reason I have a really hard time getting a defense team, a blue team or something like that, to give me their stories. And I think it's because their management, their company does not want them to talk about the day they got hacked. Like it's just kind of one of those, let's get past this as fast as we can, brush it under the rug and move on and never talk about this again. Like that's what the PR team wants, that's what the management wants, and they don't really want that to be highlighted in a show. And it's funny because I get a lot of CEOs that email me and say, "I'd love to be an expert on your show and talk about the latest news." And I'm like, "The latest news? I don't cover the latest news." But instead of that, why don't you tell me about the day your company got hacked? And I don't know if it did, but I'm assuming it did, and that would be a great episode. I'd love to hear from a CEO's perspective the day you got hacked.
And then
they
poof,
never
they
they never want to
disappear.
talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Um, you know, it's we kind of talked about how personal it is, but there's a kind of a price. I feel like not a huge price. Maybe it is. I don't know. You tell me. I mean, certainly you have to stay private now. You kind of need to maintain some sort of secrecy. You don't want to be identified by anybody. There's at least that price, right?
Mhm.
Why
Yeah.
do you keep doing that? What's your motivation? What do you feel like you want to achieve?
To stay private.
No, no, no. I mean, why do you keep creating this podcast? You
Oh,
know,
well,
like,
yeah, I mean, one of the things that just brings me such joy is to teach people things and to show them what happened. I really love this experience of like knowing of this, this secret lookout or something like that in my town, and then say, "Hey, I want to show you something." And we climb up to this, place, and we look out, and it's like a beautiful view of the city or something that, not many
yeah.
people know about. And it's, wow, this is cool, right? There's this experience of just giving someone a new experience and watching their face light up that I just get really high off of. I love that. Just showing people this cool stuff in the world. And I think that is probably the base of that is just teaching, right? Teaching someone something new and seeing their face light up and say, "Oh, wow, I didn't know that was possible," and all that stuff. And so I just love doing that. And, I make the show because I want to hear the show, but then I also make it because I love seeing people. And there's so many emails I get where people are like, "Well, I was a farmer and I listen to your show because I have 12 hours a day that I'm working in the farm, and I've just totally quit farming and I've gone into cybersecurity and I'm getting my
Wow.
certs and I just got my first internship and I'm like totally changed." Even like a auto mechanic or even a dentist, I think, told me that they switched careers. A lawyer once did it. And it's crazy that I'm pulling all these people into the infosec space because they've been on the fringe. They love computers. They had video game. They played video games. They cheated in video games. They did some hacking of whatever. They played around with programming, but they didn't know where that could lead them, and they didn't know where they wanted to go in the computer world. So they just kind of resulted to whatever their family taught them or whatever they were pushed to do.
Hmm.
But now they're seeing like, oh my gosh, there's so much fun to be had in cybersecurity, where we can catch bad guys and lock them
Yeah.
out and chase them and hack into things and all these things. And they're like, that sounds like just where I want to be in the world. And they just didn't know that before. And so you show them these things, and their eyes light up, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna do that for my career. So yeah, I mean, it's just fun to get people excited about security.
Yeah. I
That's
mean,
a big thing.
yeah. I mean, it's funny that you mention. I mean, hacking. It does converge around computers at this point in time, but it's so much more, right? You mentioned like cheating in games and things like that. Like it's a
Yeah.
mindset almost, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's just I mean, I was drawn to computers too, and then I've like moved away to do pharmacy work for a while, and I didn't, I was like, my heart was still with computers. So it was, yeah, it's one of those things that I think people fall in love with, but then they end up doing something else, and then they come back to what they love.
Yeah, it's amazing that you can take somebody from being a farmer to going starting a career in security. But I guess that's the sort of infinite possibilities of computers.
And there's
Um,
something artistic about the show, right? There's music, and there's the way I tell the stories and craft it, and the writing. I mean, if I count all the words, right, it's about 15 novels worth of stories I've written at this point.
what do you
And
enjoy more? Do you enjoy the writing more, the act of uncovering the story, the telling of the story?
it's so much work. I don't know if I enjoy it just because it's a mountain of work every 2 weeks. I'm just like, again,
Oh yeah,
gosh, I just got done with this.
yeah,
It's so much work. Maybe I'm just getting worn out from it. But the reward at the end is always worth it. But yeah, I've never been somebody who likes writing. I just am somebody who likes making stuff, and I love when something comes together and there was nothing here on this computer, and now there is something here, and this is something I made. And yeah, I mean, there is a lot of artistic stuff to it. Writing is an art, And when you make something artistic and people like it and they want more of it, there that's another high that I get off on, right? That I'm just like, wow, it's great that you appreciate the thing I've created in the world, and that just brings such a joy to me.
I mean, what's more even amazing than that is that you had to learn all these things kind of as you were getting into it, right? I mean, you probably
Yeah.
had the artistic talent within you, but storytelling, all these things, were those things that were easy for you to learn, or how was that?
Well, I'm kind of the person that's like, what is the what's the formula here? What's the method? What are the professionals saying? So I look, and there was a book called Out on the Wire, which is done by um, Ira Glass from This American Life, Roman Mars from 99% Invisible, the Jad Abumrad from Radio Lab. These kind of people put together. It's like how to tell audio stories, and it's not so much how to do the mechanical parts of it, but just the storytelling aspect of it. And I just soaked that up so much because these people are masters of their craft. And so I was like, well, I just go to the masters and they'll teach me. On top of that, there's a Khan Academy course called Pixar in a Box, which Pixar teaches the art of storytelling. So I was like, well, this is
Hmm.
great too. Pixar's great storytellers. So I mean, I went to these people who were just great at what they did, and I respected them. And I just listened to these, and I watched these, and I read these things over and over and over until I really got it, right? And so there's a lot of tricks. Like one of the tricks I learned was there's a formula that Ira Glass uses on This American Life, which is this is a story about X, but Y happens instead. And that's kind of like the formula. And what's great about this is like we think it's going in this direction. It's a story about X, but then there's that word but, but something happens instead. So our intention is to do this. So that means we've got to set the stakes to go in this direction, and then we've got to where we know that there's going to be a hard turn somewhere. We're going to go in a totally new direction, and that's kind of what that formula is, right? And so that's how I look at all stories, is in this formula kind of thing. And then we break it down into like every 90 seconds of the story, that's again how it's going to be. You think it's going in this direction, but something happens instead. And these little twists are what keep you interested and keep you hooked and listening more. And you can't wait to hear what's going to happen next and all this kind of stuff. And yeah, I mean, I pull all the tricks I can from all the masters who have been there before me. And that's kind of how I had to get started to learn how to do this as well. I didn't really know. I mean, I kind of could tell a story, but I didn't know what was great about storytelling and what isn't. And this is how I had to learn.
Are you kind of are you a film buff? Do you enjoy consuming this type of things? Are there movies that
Yeah,
you really love that really inspired you to kind of get into this?
yeah. I think Wes Anderson is a big
Uh,
influence, and I really like slight edge, like edgier, grittier films, like I don't know, Fight Club or 13
oh yeah,
Monkeys, and stuff that's just a little bit cerebral and cinematically amazing. These are the shows that I like the most. Mr. Robot's, of course, a great show, and it holds back. It doesn't put a bow on it and just says, "Here's the whole thing. You're
yeah,
done." It gives you something to think about and something to explore in your own self. And
right.
another great
A little riddle to kind of uncover while you're watching.
Yeah, and another show that I really like is called Princess Mononoke, and
Oh yeah,
there's three like fighting factions in this. It's like an anime, and there's this place called Irontown where they're just trying to help people, and they want to support, they want a nice safe place for the humans to live, and they're helping people who are in need and stuff in Irontown. And so you feel good about help, maybe that's the place that should win. But then there's the forest people, and the animals in the forest that are getting wrecked because of Irontown, so they're trying to battle against Irontown. So now you're like, oh wait, the forest people should maybe they, it's hard to know which side to be on. But then there's like there's like other people involved in this. There are people who want
yeah.
glory and to try to like solve problems and have peace, and so you want them to win as well. And so in that one movie, you're torn and twisted of which side to root for and be on, and you really don't know. It's really hard because everyone has a good point on why they're doing what they do, and it's almost impossible for them to live together in harmony. And I
Yeah.
love stories like that that just tear you apart internally, where you don't know what you want as the film is ending. It's not like, oh, I just want this one thing to be solved and then everything will be okay. No, there's so many things that you need. And I love that in storytelling as well.
Yeah, because it's such a human thing. Because nobody's truly, well, I guess the majority of people aren't truly evil or truly good, right? We're all complex creatures.
Yeah.
A
Yeah,
lot of that
exactly.
comes out in the stories you tell, I feel like.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess to conclude, I want to ask you, what's your message to everybody out there? What's your legacy, the lasting impression? I want to kind of touch on the future before we end. Where do
Mm.
you think Darknet is going?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to document some of these big stories, right? So, Stuxnet and stuff like that. Let's just kind of recap when it's all over and put it out there, and now it's out there, right? And I know like Kim Zetter has written a book on it, so people have done it, but I'm just saying, like, I like when the story's over, somebody needs to come through and do a front to back. Here's the whole story of that, and it doesn't have to be something big like Stuxnet. It could be something smaller, like um, Darknet marketplace, uh, person who ran that or something, right? So anything could be there. I like putting that together, capsulating it, and then putting it out there and saying, okay, now you can go consume this whole story. And I like that. So I hope that's a legacy that kind of sticks around, because these stories are kind of timeless. But
Mm,
it's also interesting how much technology has shifted over time and where we are today versus where we were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And I think like 50 years from now, we probably won't even have keyboards anymore, right?
oh yeah.
Everything will just be like voice activated or just type on your arm, or, like more ubiquitous inputs, AI, thoughts, whatever, Neuralink. So
Right.
50 years from now, it'd be fun to look back at a show like this to say, this is what hacking was at that, in the after the turn of the century. And I hope that that's kind of a legacy that sticks around.
Ah, amazing. Yeah. Well, awesome. Jack, thank you so much. It was so nice to talk to you. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was great. It's always fun catching up with you.
Yeah, buddy. All right. Thanks so much.
All right.